Alright, making a video. Yeah, draft physics. Probably just comments. Just saying hello, basically. So, I really don't want to do philosophy on this channel, you know. But yeah, the people talking physics are so rare that there isn't much to do except respond to videos that are just, they're not a conversation about physics. It's they're telling you what it is, and they're telling you, and I'm pointing out that they're using as evidence things that are not real evidence, that they're really bad descriptions of the evidence. And the only dominant players, was Hofstadter, did make some videos on physics, but none of them pointing out what he thinks is right, how he thinks the thing works, what parts of the story he is convinced by. So there's not much to deal with. All he did was point out critiques of arguments I made to counter conventional notions, and I would argue that in most of those cases I pointed out how he was wrong in his misinterpretation of what I was arguing for, and how something I argued for didn't work or something. I explained how, of course, it does work. And then Piro is completely vacuous. He just keeps claiming he's made some sort of physics video somewhere where he actually did a good job of explaining why quantum mechanics, or how, or what evidence proves it's the most proven theory in the history of mankind or something. That why we should believe Huygens is true, why we should believe Heisenberg's notion of a photon that has no position is true, why we should think electrons have a wavelength when they don't, all these things. Why there's some sort of randomness, where they proved anything called randomness, and where they proved even so simple things like light is bent by gravity. Is the evidence really proof? Is it really conclusive? Is it beyond a reasonable doubting? And I'm just making the argument, it's clearly doubtable. And there are alternative ways of interpreting the data and understanding it that leave the universe still mechanical. And there's no need for any magical fields or magical spooky action kind of events. They're all understandable events. So yeah, you can't really make a video to people who don't explain their position. So there's nothing to respond to, really, except respond to their accusations that are unfounded, where they say you're denying 400 years of science or something, Piro says preposterous things that have nothing to do with the truth of the circumstance. What exactly is being rejected and what isn't. And so their whole argument relies on lies. So, in the last video, I clearly point out how the aberration argument, which really just has to do with, you can sort of understand, there's a thing here and a thing moving around it in gravity. Now, the argument would be as if gravity was dependent on the two things, like the moon had to be there for there to be gravity. Okay, you can understand that, well, it would take time for the moon's influence on the Earth to send back a reaction. And so the moon would be in a different position by the time the Earth sent back its reaction. Well, gravity doesn't work that way. It's not sending messages. So the point is that the gravity that the moon falls into all the time isn't the gravity the moon's creating. It's not telling the Earth, move towards me to create gravity for me for this one day, for this instant. No, it's just adding more gravity to the Earth's system. So you make a big circle around where the moon is circularly traveling, and in that circle you've added more mass, which means the Earth now has more gravity at that location with the moon there than with the moon gone. So you can sort of understand if there was a sun and an Earth, that if you were standing on this side over here looking at it, there's more mass in the Sun-Earth than there is if the sun was all by itself. So it affects things outside the circle. It doesn't affect things inside the circle. So the point is time doesn't matter because the sun has already created the gravity. Without the Earth even existing, the sun is already creating the gravity in the Earth's orbit. The orbit already has a shadow created by the fact that the sun has absorbed energy from all directions, okay, and is releasing it with a delay. So the sun is a battery, as I sort of implied or stated. It stores an amount, so it's like ground, like electricity. You could pump a bunch of positive energy, a bunch of lightning into the ground, and eventually you're going to raise the potential of the ground to a higher electrical potential. But it'll take time. It doesn't happen instantaneously because the pressure has to move through the entire Earth system to increase the potential everywhere. So lightning strikes in China, there's not automatically a boost in the electricity here, in North America. It takes time for the overall potential to increase. And the same thing is with gravity. So it doesn't really matter what position the moon is in. The interaction isn't dependent on what's happening this moment. The interaction is dependent on the fact that the sun and the Earth have already absorbed energy and are already creating gravitational shadows. So I explained it. I draw it. And this idiot says this crap, where he's basically just ignoring the fact that I'm telling you why. Okay, the Earth is hot. It's taking in force, energy, movement, and converting it to much slower movement. So it takes in the stuff moving at the speed of light, and the stuff leaving is leaving much, much slower. The movement's much slower. So I gave the example of us. Gravity goes into us at the speed of light. We dent the cushion much slower than that. We dent the ground much slower than that. And we certainly vibrate China much, much later. It takes a long time for the energy to move through the system. And that becomes a damping effect. And that eliminates any aberration problem because there's no instantaneous communication necessary for the Earth to fall into the sun or for the moon to fall into the Earth. So anyway, okay, this video is all you need to show DraftScience full of shit. So again, I don't know how else I can tell you. There can't be an aberration problem when you've dampened the system. You've taken all the necessity for any instantaneous communication out of the system. It doesn't exist. There's no necessity for it. Alright, the Wikipedia page, if you actually read it, well, I did read the whole paragraph, so this is just more lies. It says that the problem is about where the gravity points, i.e. the gravity doesn't point. There's gravity right next to me. That's exactly the same, 10 meters per second per second. I drop this thing over here. It falls. It doesn't fall because it's going to have an interaction with the Earth. The interaction has already been established. The absence of pressure, the more pressure going this way than is going this way, already exists over here. Okay, there's nothing, let's say this little block of space right here. There's nothing in it. There's still 10 meters per second of force differential between what's coming up and what's coming down right over there. It doesn't need this to be there for the gravity to already be there. I mean, Jesus, this is just so... anyway. So, gravity doesn't point. Doesn't need to point. Where the emergent push force points. So again, there's no pointing force. The force already exists. It's being created by the mass of the objects in the Earth. The Earth creates the gravity by having bits that are constantly moving towards the center of the Earth. And their constant movement is a consequence of the force being absorbed while they're moving. When matter is moving, it means it absorbed a force. It can't move unless it absorbs a force. So obviously the motion of all the crap in the Earth is real motion that absorbed real force and created gravity on the opposite side of the Earth. Anyway, the net push is to the retarded position. So again, he doesn't understand spherical symmetry, doesn't understand what spheres indicate in the sense that you're absorbing force in both directions. You're creating a shadow on both sides, and it's just a fact. And the fact is that even though the system has to be at equilibrium at some point, the point is that equilibrium still has to be established, still has to be filled. So if the stuff is constantly moving, something still has to be added to create the constant movement, because it's still leaving eventually. So you always have to keep feeding the gravity engine. It's about where the force vector points. So again, the force is always pointing, and it's pointing in every direction. That's what the inverse square law describes, is the fact that the gravity is always on, and it's always the same based on the distance. Oh, I forgot, you don't know jack shit about Newtonian mechanics. There's no such thing as Newtonian mechanics in the first place. But what exactly, where did Newton have to deal with this? Oh, that's right, Newton didn't deal with it, because Newton basically thought gravity was instantaneous. So this doesn't have anything to do with Newtonian mechanics. He has nothing. Well, so I just point out how, no, I have a complete answer to the question, why is the gravity always on? Well, it's always on because the Earth is hot. And as I pointed out, the bigger you make something, the hotter it's going to be, because it is absorbing force. Every little piece of matter that it's made of is still trying to get to the center of the Earth. It's gravity. It's still being affected by it. It's still accelerating. And by accelerating and moving, it's basically occupying a force. That is, it's retaining it. And by retaining it, in another process, it's moving much slower than the force actually moves. Then that breaks, that delay means that you have to measure equilibrium over time. You can't measure it any instant to instant. Obviously, the Earth being in association with the Sun changes the Sun's profile gravitationally, but over time. It doesn't do it instantaneously. This has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with escaping the shadow or any of that crap. Says you. Okay, there's no argument here explaining how it isn't about absorbing momentum, which clearly answers the question. And the fact is, Mach gravity satisfies the condition, as long as you understand that the condition is you're absorbing a force that would go somewhere else if you didn't absorb it. If it's just kind of obvious. If there's a thing here and a thing here, all right, I remove this thing. Okay, let's say this thing. Okay, you know, it's just this idea. This thing can't move unless something acts on it. A force. That's Newtonian mechanics, idiot. A force has to act on it. Can't move without absorbing a force. And if it absorbs a force by moving towards this other object, then that's force that would have hit this one, but it's not going to hit it now, but something else absorbed it. I mean, what don't you understand about that? Okay. The fact that you go over an entire Wikipedia section. So before, he just denies that somehow, if you actually read it. Well, I did actually read it. I read it word for word. Pretending to understand everything only to base it on a false straw man demonstration. That straw man demonstrates that there is no credibility to your rhetoric. The fact that you go over an entire Wikipedia section pretending to understand everything only to base it on a false straw man, and the false straw man is what? That the center of the Earth is molten because gravity's causing that? Because the pressure being applied by gravity, by the force, is being transferred from a speed of light force into chemical reactions, movement of electrons and protons, and then movement of whole atoms, and all of that movement is creating heat. Yes, where is that a straw man? That's a counter-argument to your silly explanations. That there is no credibility to your rhetoric. So again, where's the credibility failure? Force causes heat. Where's the surprise there? You are either incredibly stupid or full of shit. Well, again, you're the one making no argument. By the way, water is diamagnetic. It doesn't. It's completely irrelevant to talk about substances that aren't metals and talk about magnetism in a sense. It's just kind of a waste of time. So even your attempt at saving face by saying magnets are dipoles doesn't save your false fact. Now, the argument being made is that anything that is affected by charge will be affected by a magnet. It's the same exact force. That's the argument I'm making. So in any experiment, you should be able to replace any charged element with a magnetic element as long as you can prevent the dipolar effect from diluting what you're trying to create. But the fact is, charge is just monopoles of magnetism. That's the argument I'm making. And again, you fail to present evidence disputing that. So, screw you. But just a garbage comment, right? Didn't deal with what I argued at all. And again, I stated quite clearly, there's no aberration problem if the fact is that gravity is not being created by something new introduced. The gravity always exists. The sun's creating gravity at all the r-squared locations, distances. The gravity's already there. It doesn't need something to create more gravity. It doesn't need something to add to the sun's gravity. Again, if the sun is here and I put an earth here, from a viewer's point of view over here, right? A viewer looks at the sun. The sun has a certain amount of gravity. If I put a little earth right here, well, the fact is it'll have more gravity now. So from the outside, it matters. Inside doesn't matter. All right. Just like with magnetism. Gravity affects the magnet. That's what's affecting the magnet, is gravity. And what comes out of the magnet is magnetism. So what leaves it is the part that gets segregated. So it expels it changed. That doesn't change how gravity affects it at all. It's just affecting how it converts gravity into segregated force. So it doesn't change its gravitational nature at all by expelling the gravity in instead of mixed, it's segregated. It doesn't care. It's expelling the same amount of force. It's just now segregated the two forces. It's the same exact stuff going through it, just like gravity would, especially if the magnet isn't moving. So if this was a magnet and I'm pushing on it to keep it floating, all that's happening is gravity's going in, and instead of reflecting it as mixed force, it's reflecting it as the red stuff one end, the black stuff at the other end. So it doesn't change anything for this battery. It doesn't know it's a magnet, if it was a magnet. It doesn't know it. It doesn't care until another magnet shows up that will take advantage of the fact that it has a filter. Anyway. But no, this is not a rational counter-argument of any kind. Just rude crap. Alright, so I don't think there was much else here in the comments, but we'll read what we can. So, superior mind, chickens and baseballs, I like it. Yeah, well, it's a little dangerous to play with living creatures as an example, but whatever. Yeah, your example about having a friend visiting Donald Trump is a false one. And false in what way? I mean, if you found out your best friend was a serial killer, would you just say, oh yeah, well, he's got some problems? No, you might say, gee, I picked my friends kind of poorly. Because we damn well know you'd blow up, which you did in the cited examples. I don't know. How are you countering one argument with this other argument? the simple argument is that everybody's allowed to have standards. And so I gave an example of what might be reasonable standards. And how are you countering that example? Oh, that's right, you're not. And yell until you're red like a tomato, disproving the idea that you're polite. So again, you can't cite any example of that. So show me where my standards were unreasonable. You should be able to cite them. You should be able to link to the video where I unreasonably replied. I mean, a couple of times I misunderstood what somebody was saying. I mean, that happens. But that's like, what, 3 times? So show a common example of where I held somebody to a too high a standard. See, you're not going to get past scrutiny for anyone who is actually attentive to details and logic. So you're just pretending that somehow you care about a detail when you have no details. You're, again, saying shit with no evidence. And then you're talking about what the evidence says. Right? The whole conversation is essentially talking about how weak the evidence is for these conclusions you've drawn. And here you are showing how you don't give a shit about evidence. You don't have evidence for any of this crap. Anyone attentive can see that you are dishonestly changing the scenario from moment to moment. So again, that's just a statement, again, not evidenced by anything. Where am I changing any standards? Where if I could possibly argue that I am one of the most consistent speakers on the YouTube. I mean, in the sense that the story doesn't change. And it's these manipulative actions that you keep doing. So again, this manipulation, no citation to a manipulation. Just show me the video. Give me the clip of the video where I'm manipulating something. Is this a manipulation? Me honestly saying this is just idiotic nonsense. I can't make any sense of your accusations at all. I cite an example of holding somebody to a standard and saying there's a point where I don't want to be friends. I mean, there are cliches about, some of your worst enemies can be your friends, and, it is a problem, okay, when friends go bad. It's a real problem. It's not a non-reality. So I just cite an example where, you're complaining because somehow I don't allow, I don't, first off, I've explained to you how I have no use for having conversation with people I agree with. I'm just sorry. I mean, it's just a waste of time to have conversations with people you agree with. You don't understand that part? I'm not here to have friendly, fun conversation because I don't see anything friendly or fun about conversation. I just got no use for it. It's like talking about how green the grass is or something. Why would I waste my time on trivial crap? So because I don't get off on just talking to people and saying how, oh, you look marvelous, and then they say, oh, you look marvelous, I have no interest in doing that. All right? So I don't know what exactly you think that somehow I'm supposed to say to all the people that say, okay, I like your idea, Gary. I'm supposed to what? I'm supposed to fondle them and hug them and say, gee, thanks, I'm so special, it means so much to me. When I don't even know why they're accepting it, right? They might be accepting it because they like my hair. Or they might be accepting it because they like my voice. And there's some stupid reason. So I don't know what the credibility of their understanding is or anything about it. So why should I make a presumption that because they agree with me, they're brilliant? Or because they agree with me, I should be best buddies? No. So again, so you value that. I don't value that. I value resolving the problem. The problem is we have a conflict. We don't see it the same way. And there has to be a reason why that's happening. Now, you're saying the reason is I'm dishonest. And I'm just pointing out how, no, I think the reason is because you people are dishonest. Because you can't honestly describe the actual evidence. And why are people lying about the evidence? Well, they lie about evidence because their theory sucks. And they have to try to make it sound like it doesn't suck. So that's when they start quote mining. That's why they start taking distorted pieces of it. It's because they have weak evidence. That's when you start cheating. It's when you can't make the argument. So your accusation is that somewhere I did that. And I'm saying, prove it. And I'm saying they do it. And I'm proving it. by playing. All the professional physicists doing the same thing, citing experiments that never took place, to kind of demonstrate that, oh yeah, this is solid stuff, our theory of unsolid physics, of Heisenberg mystery. And no, all that mystery is defended by evidence that isn't real. That's just their thought experiments. They're not in real experiments. So, fuck you. Just crap. Alright, so I don't know how much of this I want to get into. I just noticed a bunch of talking about the theory of evolution, which seems a little distant from the subject. The only thing I'm pointing out is that clearly evolution has overwhelming physical evidence, where clearly these presumptions and assumptions and pronouncements of quantum mechanics lovers has nowhere near that kind of credible evidence. It's neither in volume nor in quality do they have anything like the material evidence to defend what they're saying the reality is. Alright, as to the comment being read at about 27 minutes into the video, so again, just, whatever. You really think I'm going to go back to the video and find 26 minutes, listen to the video again to find out what you're talking about evolution being denied for many, many more centuries. So again, you just don't want to care to stay really on any other subjects that could matter here, right? I mean, I make a simple point that there's a huge volume of evidence for the theory of evolution, and obviously they don't have anything like that for what they're claiming to be their Big Bang or their black holes or any of the stuff they're claiming. He appears to be referring to Darwin in this comment, but the theory has only been around in anything like its present form since the middle of the 19th century. No, that's just not true anyway. The theory of evolution existed before Darwin. Darwin's grandfather believed in evolution. Before Darwin wrote his book, his grandfather already believed it. Okay, so people had already surmised it might be possible that the Earth, produced us, not a god. To say that it has been denied for many more centuries is false. It's just idiotic to not realize that it's obviously been denied by most of the human race forever, for the whole existence of the human race. Most of the people alive at any one minute on the planet Earth have been believers in angels and bullshit. That's just a fact. Because something to be denied, it first has to be presented to the denier. And the only argument being made is that Darwin provided a proof. That's all. Darwin didn't invent the idea, he invented proof, in the sense that he provided a compilation of all of, not even all of, but a variety of elements of angles from which you could understand how the selection process was taking place, and made clear analogies to human selection and the fact that nature would do the same selecting process by a different standard. So where we would evolve our cabbages to have greener leaves, evolution would evolve the cabbage to have poisonous spines. And you can't present something to a denier before it exists. So again, this is you're just too fucking pukey. I mean, this is a silly thing to bring up on this board, frankly. So the action there is false. The accusation there is false. It's just stupid. Clearly, people have are substantially denying a hugely evidenced theory, and clearly the physicists are accepting a hugely unevidenced theory. And this is the problem with their logical process of human beings. They clearly can't do this. They can't separate themselves from biases. So I'll play her thing. The creationists of Darwin's time period were intent on disproving it and being malicious. Funny enough, just added to the mountain of evidence to cement it as a reality. I don't know. I mean, clearly just making claims about we're not monkeys or saying something stupid like that doesn't debunk the theory. I think the denial he's referring to is the butthurt public schooling system refusing to teach it during that time. And again, obviously it doesn't matter whether they teach it or not, in the sense that there's not much to teach. I mean, you can just point out certain bits of the evidence, and what's the evidence for the counter theory, which is this silly God notion. Oh, there's no evidence of that mush. The origin of the species, the preservation of the favored races in the struggle for survival, was published in the mid-19th century. That's around 1850 or so. It was been 170 years to take since it was published. I don't know what the definition of many is, but surely the definition of many is more than 1.7. I don't know what that means. I don't know where this 1.7 came from. It's just no. I'm just forget it. It's just not worth talking about. This is the silly distraction. So you just make a simple argument that one theory has a huge amount of evidence, and the other theory has weak evidence by comparison, and then somebody converts that into an argument about, well, even though it's heavily evidenced, most people don't even believe it. Which is a problem, but that's really not my problem. I'm arguing that to people who are supposed to be intelligent, and intelligent people usually are persuaded by evidence. That's sort of how it works. So yeah, the scientists and all the smart people accept evolution, no problem. But there's a huge problem because they're accepting a whole bunch of bullshit theories about reality based on very weak evidence. Photons being bent by gravity, for example. Alright, so I'm just going to delete this one just because I just think it's a stupid thread. Waste of my time. Alright, so I think that's all there is. I don't think, I'll see if there's any new spam, but let's see. I don't even know what this is. Sharp Police. At 1 hour and 34 minutes. In 18 seconds, what you say is false. So again, they can't quote me. They can't write the sentence, what I said. Just two videos. It was pointed out to you with book reference and link that Kirchhoff's integral theorem gives you the patterns you say everyone is ignoring. Again, it's just crap. First off, all you do is derive the equation. There's no evidence that you actually compare it to an actual pattern and prove that the math actually describes the pattern. So all you do is derive the equation into a new equation and say, there, I've solved it. Where's the actual physical proof where you show how the equation actually predicts the result? So show me that. Show them actually doing the equation and showing how it matches the result of the pattern. So you don't have a proof of any kind. And clearly my argument is, if this was the truth, and this is so profoundly interesting, then why isn't it at any of the other university websites? Why is it only in one place on the internet? And clearly it's 3 different processes. So none of this has anything to do with anything but contriving mathematics. You're engineering it to attempt to make it fit. Just like Einstein engineered mathematics to explain Mercury's precession. And almost nobody can do the math. Okay, so clearly it was just engineered for the purpose. Alright, so who's arguing otherwise? No one is saying photons have extra speed or velocity. Yes, they are. Clearly, if a photon's moving the speed of light in this direction, and then you say, I'm going to give the photon drift velocity in this direction, that's the only way the light clock can go this way. Go forward in time and bounce off a mirror that moved ahead to go back to the other side. Obviously, the photon can't do that. And as one video demonstrated, Einstein didn't think so either. And that's why he invented, okay, the fact of photons being bent by gravity. So the thing I said is, why did Einstein even mess with that in the first place? Well, he messed with it because he had to fix, okay, the problem where he couldn't make everything equal. He couldn't say all acceleration is the same. He couldn't say the laws of physics are always the same, or whatever the play on words is, which are agreeable words, where I would argue the laws of physics are always the same. And he's in fact arguing they're different in a sense, by claiming you can have a frame where something different can happen. But anyway, point is he proposed that gravity bends photons twice as much as any other object in the universe to account for the very fact that a light clock wouldn't work in a spaceship, because it won't hit the mirror back and forth. If you move the spaceship half the speed of light, the photon will miss the mirror and never bounce back again. It will, the side of the ship will move away and the photon won't be able to hit the target, because the target will move away and the photon will go straight. Now, these other idiots are arguing that the photon jumps to the future to still hit the mirror that is moving away. Now, how is that not two motions? It's moving the speed of light in this direction, and somehow it's drifting in this direction. Now, that's two momentums, asshole. There's no way to get around that. That's saying a photon is a baseball, and that you can combine momentums and give it more than one. You can combine two momentums and give it a new trajectory that is a new speed, because that's what happens to a baseball. If you combine two momentums in a baseball and throw it, and it leaves your hand in a new direction, it has a new speed. Photons can't change their speed, right? So you can't do that with a photon. I mean, people are just so fucking full of shit. Alright, who's arguing otherwise? You are. No one is saying photons have extra speed or velocity. Clearly, they are. If you're going this way at the same time you're going the speed of light this way, that's more than one motion in more than one direction. So no one. Yeah, well, no one except the people arguing exactly that. This is exactly the type of straw manning. So she calls it straw manning when they actually draw the image of the photon moving forward in space. So I'm straw manning them with their own illustration. So 60 symbols illustrates the photon moving forward in space, and I'm straw manning. I don't think so. You keep getting called out on. No, I don't. This is the first time anybody's made this idiotic accusation. Okay, they believe photons move forward, idiot. Oh, God, you're so stupid. Alright, 725. If you did the calculation, energy needed to move the Earth at least at half orbit. Alright, so I'm supposed to know what a half orbit is. Energy needed to move the Earth in at least a half orbit. What the fuck is that? The speed of the Earth is irrelevant. That's a constant. Nothing's taking away from the forward velocity of the Earth. So the orbital speed is the Earth's velocity. That doesn't change. The only thing that's changing is it's getting pushed towards the sun. You find out that the Earth would be heating up by orders of magnitude more than the total output of the sun. Well, that's just a lie. So show me where there's any obligation for that to be happening at all. It's absolute nonsense. It heats through a process. It's momentum. You have to absorb momentum to heat up. So where would it be getting all this extra momentum to absorb to heat? Heat is movement. As I'm pointing out, the only way I say an electron moves or a proton moves or an atom moves is it has to absorb energy to move. So it can't move if there's no energy moving it. So how could it actually heat up more than the sun when it's not? There's not enough energy producing. There's not enough force. Even if you absorbed all the force, you couldn't do that. Oh, it's just so stupid. This is where math actually matters. See, these are more little cliche statements where they say something like somehow mathematics is on their side. There's no mathematics. This is all your crap. You falsely premise something. So you falsely say, you're saying 2 plus 3 equals 7. No, I'm saying 2 plus 3 equals 5. You're saying I'm saying something. I'm not saying. You're just full of shit. Okay, you're more of this intuitive ideas. This has nothing to do with intuition. I have spent 7 years developing this, and it has nothing to do with intuition. Now, the fact that when I was a kid and they gave me this idiotic notion that photons are doing all this bullshit, it wasn't intuition that said that's bullshit. Okay, it wasn't like I was innately born with the ability to call bullshit. No, the bullshit came from the fact that, what evidence do you have for that? I mean, snakes are complex organisms, they can do that. But how does a photon do all this shit? I mean, this is just bullshit. How does it know how to do all that crap? Alright, don't pan out. So, fuck you. They pan out just fine. And the proof is that nobody can do what I'm asking, which is to play one of the videos in my subject videos, or just listen to it and provide some sort of counter argument to anything said in those videos. Yeah, finally you admit your particle gravity warms things up. There's no admission. It was stated from the beginning, and it's clearly what I'm arguing. Anytime you absorb a force, you're causing movement. That's how movement happens. Matter doesn't move unless some force causes it to. That's Newton's law. So, I mean, that was always a premise of this argument, you idiot. To the point, things vaporize in seconds. Well, just absolute nonsense. No necessity for that at all. No obligation, no mathematical rules, no anything. No fact of the universe requires that at all. This is like some asshole before they made a space rocket saying, you can't shoot a tons of thrust out the back of the rocket, the whole space shuttle will evaporate. No, it won't. Now imagine both bodies in motion or orbiting one another. Obviously, they're both gravitational, so they both influence each other. Yes, that happens, idiot. Obviously, the shadow dilutes with distance. Again, where have I argued any other argument? I've been arguing for the inverse square law. The whole point is that the particle theory creates the inverse square law. It gives you a reason why things go spherical and why there's an inverse square law. It perfectly explains why it mechanically happens, idiot. But that strength of shadows is with respect to where the body used to be. So he's making this same aberration argument, where again he's presuming that the interaction, there's no gravity until the moon shows up. The Earth isn't producing any. It's not absorbing any energy and not producing any force differential until the moon shows up. So the Earth essentially doesn't have a shadow unless there's something to cast it on. That's what he's sort of saying. Until the floor shows up for me to cast a shadow on it, I'm not making a shadow. Obviously that's stupid. Jesus. Okay, you don't understand criticism. The criticism. Again, all these times, you think I'm going to realistically, just for you, I'm going to waste my time and go to all these time codes in a video and re-listen to the video. Amazing that people think this is... I mean, it's bad enough, okay, none of you assholes are literate or are functional enough to make videos. So you can't have conversation. You can't explain what you're trying to explain in some sort of... with the detail, that comes out of conversational functioning, using your brain, forcing your brain to think and provide an explanation for why you believe what you believe or what impresses you about something. So you can't do any of that, and you're stuck in this text environment. And then you sit there and you can't put in quotation marks what it is you're talking about. Amazing. Okay, you don't understand the criticism. This has nothing to do with the escaping any shadow. You are making an egregious straw man. So more nonsense. There's no straw man. So he just keeps saying straw man, straw man. That's not an argument. How is it a straw man? You have to explain the straw man. You can't just say straw man. You have to explain why it's a straw man. Why that's not what you said. You're the ones who keep misquoting me. Obviously not quoting me. Time coding me. Alright, let's just go to this. I'm just curious. 1123 says this is a straw man.
Here, so I don't feel the gravity. That doesn't happen. Because the system is the battery. And the system dampens any time delays because it already has a time delay built into it. It already has...
Right. So just like some charge phenomena or something else, you can't expect something to happen on one side and an instantaneous reaction on the other side. It all takes a bunch of time. And the fact is that the Earth is creating gravity just by existing. All the stuff on its surface right now is accelerating towards the center. It's creating tremendous pressure, and that pressure is heat. Pressure is created by moving stuff. Okay, so it's moving stuff to create the pressure, and very high pressure requires a lot of force to be involved. So there's a lot of force being used up to create that pressure, and that used up force is essentially the thing that's creating the gravity the moon's falling into. Such assholes. Alright, the moon's shadow is where the moon is not there. So again, the moon is creating a new gravitational problem for the Earth because it's new matter that's heading for its center. So in a sense, it's creating a kind of, see how to put this. It eventually, if it was to hit the Earth, it would be creating pressure on the other stuff. Yeah, again, it's just this outside-in argument. You can only see a system from outside the system. From inside the system, it's exactly the opposite. The pressures are all the opposite direction. If you go inside the Earth, everything's pushing, they're pushing in from both sides, so that wouldn't change. I don't know what metaphor to use. What analogies. Another thing, Hafiday's videos on philosophy, or one of them, somebody says, I'm using too many analogies and metaphors. That's all we have. That's exactly how logic works. Every word is defined by other words. Every concept has identity based on how you compare it to other things. Everything is understood by comparing it to other things that have the same properties or don't have the same properties. Have opposite properties, hostile properties. I mean, that's the only way you can understand anything, is to compare it to other things that are like it. This is so stupid. Alright, so, but the fact is, I'm just saying, the gravity already exists. The moon doesn't have to exist. The moon will change the gravitational profile, but not for the sake of what's going to happen to the moon. The gravity that the moon is falling in is created by us. I'm creating the gravity that the moon's falling into, not the moon. The moon will create gravity that something else falls into. Alright? So that's how you have to understand it. The mass on the Earth is already creating the gravity the moon is falling into. The moon's not creating that gravity. The moon is creating gravity something on the other side of the moon will fall into. Okay, your theory either explains Newtonian mechanics or it doesn't. I'm just saying, Mach gravity satisfies, even by Feynman's admission, all of the relevant gravitational functions. And the thing it lacks is an explanation for the drag problem. So you can bring that up again if you want, but I've already explained that. So you can't just keep denying that Mach gravity doesn't work, because of course it does work. So yes, these points about force components are relevant. They should be relevant to your theory, because see, what the Wikipedia just glossed over is Einstein's the one that has the problem. Einstein's the one who's got to explain, because Einstein's theory is dependent on the body's creating gravity. Not that the gravity is already created by the body itself. This is such a false analogy. No, it's a very good one. It's not even an analogy. Yes, it is. The tangent component of the force vectors will increase angular momentum. No, they won't. It doesn't matter how much the Earth is swirling, whether the Earth is swirling inside this way, or it's swirling this way, or it's swirling this way. It doesn't matter, because we know what energy went in. So it's always about how the energy goes into a system. That's the part the Earth is actually remembering. So it doesn't matter where it is in a circle. If I push a wheel, it was real momentum in this direction. And the only way it gets changed into all these other directions is because of what happens in the center. The center does the conversion. The center of its gravity moves. And if it was an axle, pressure on that axle will change, and the axle will move. And that's a fact. And that's why gyroscopes can move things, is because it's translating the angular momentum and converting it. Idiot. Alright, the analogy applies to you because you are the one who keeps strawmanning the criticism. You read the point, you point out how gravity, the moon is not creating the gravity that's affecting the moon. It's just not. It's just a fact. The moon doesn't create the gravity that causes the moon to fall into the Earth. The gravity was already created by the stuff in the Earth. Alright, so then he says, mumbo jumbo, if you don't understand what they're saying, why are you commenting on this page? So, I don't know. I mean, let's go find out what that is. I clearly didn't find their explanation for how Einstein avoids this problem by just saying they have some velocity component. Yeah, the velocity component fixes the problem. Well, I wonder what that would be. Yeah, I found that rather vacuous.
So just more mumbo jumbo. Velocity dependent terms.
Yeah, there it is. Velocity dependent terms. Now you know what a velocity dependent terms are, okay? I don't. I don't know what velocity dependent terms means as an explanation for how they don't have a problem with position and the gravity not communicating at the right speed. So what does that mean? What does the velocity dependent terms mean? You're saying I'm an idiot because I'm saying, yeah, I don't see exactly how that's an explanation of anything. It's not like Wikipedia had that highlighted, so you could click on it and go to the page on velocity dependent terms. They apparently don't have a page linked to velocity dependent terms. You people are just such fucking hypocrites. If you don't understand what they're saying, why are you commenting on the page? Isn't my comment exactly saying I don't understand that term? Didn't I just say that? Jesus Christ. You're just so pathetic. Oh, what crap. Alright, so we can officially delete this shit. Alright, so I think I've now been over this enough. So, let's see if there's anything else I wanted to say. So yeah, I mean, I'd like to respond to Piro's physics, but Piro doesn't make any physics videos. He has to assert something for me to critique his physics. So he doesn't put anything on the table to critique, so there's nothing to critique. And he doesn't critique anything I specifically argue in any of my videos. He critiques some vague notion that I've denied 400 years of science, where he doesn't cite any of the evidence of any science I'm denying. Any evidence I'm denying, any experiment I'm denying, any mathematical equation I'm denying. He doesn't cite a single specific thing at all. It's just a general statement that somehow I committed a crime, and he won't cite what the crime is. which is just bullshit. And then Hathaway will at least cite the crimes, but they're all wrong citations. So he just keeps implying that I beat my wife, and I just explain, no, I don't beat my wife. But he doesn't say anything about what he believes. So there's nothing to critique because he doesn't stand on any ground. He won't commit to Copenhagen or many worlds, or he won't commit to anything. So there's nothing I can critique of his bullshit because he doesn't make a statement about anything. Again, these are just people who tear shit down. They don't build anything. So I guess that's the good analogy. I mean, I clearly show you how I'm putting the bricks together to build something. They don't do any of that. They just show up with a sledgehammer and try to knock things down, which is just bullshit. And the only stuff I'm knocking down is obviously the stuff that won't, that's basically saying you're not allowed to build a new building. So of course I'm going to knock them down, because that's an obnoxious bullshit to say nobody else can make a building. Of course I can make a building. I can make a better one than yours. Alright, so I suppose enough said. But I'll just throw it in there just because I mentioned Hathaway on the philosophy stuff. I mean, I'll probably get around to making some kind of response to him, but there's no response to make. We've already been through the argument, right? I mean, I just make the simple observation that if there was an intelligence showed up in our universe, and it was just this really smart thing that knew all kinds of mechanical truths, you know, knew how dense plastic was, and it knew all the physics stuff, knew all kinds of interesting physics, and it showed up here, and it showed up on Earth, and then you allowed it to sample, like it could actually sample what other things in some sense way, and so it could sample what things feel. So it could sample somebody in extreme pain, and then it could sample them being relieved of extreme pain, for example. I'm just saying that that intelligence would say, wow, that's really bad, that pain stuff. That sucks. And it would say, yeah, not having pain is really good. So yes, relief, really good. Pressure, pain, really bad. And he says that's not a reasonable thing. He doesn't have any expectation that an intelligence would do that. So if I gave an intelligence knowledge of painful sensation and pleasurable sensation, I'm arguing the intelligence would say, yeah, that stuff's really bad. Don't play with that pain stuff. Don't hit that button if you don't have to. That's a bad button. Don't touch it. He's saying the intelligence would say, oh yeah, it doesn't matter. Relief, pain. Relief, pain. I can't tell the difference. How can that be a starting point? There's nothing. We have absolutely nothing to talk about, because in my opinion, the intelligence isn't going to waste its time figuring out what's the average diameter of the average crater on the moon. It's not going to waste its time on doing that kind of shit. The only thing it's going to notice is, hey, this pain stuff is really important. We got to get rid of that. We got to quit hitting buttons that cause that, because that's bad stuff. And that's the only logical direction an intelligence could possibly. It's the only possibility. There isn't any other possibility. There's no other. You can't write this movie. You can't write the story of how the intelligence experiences pain, suffering, and says unimportant. It's not a possible movie. Nobody could write that book and get away with it. Nobody could write that story as a Lord of the Rings or something. Lord of the Irrelevant Suffering. There'll never be a movie made, Lord of the Irrelevant Suffering. You're a lunatic. No one's going to buy it. Nothing with a functioning brain. Only a psychotic could see any logic in saying suffering doesn't matter. It's unimportant. It doesn't have any value. Only a psychotic. Alright, so there's no foundation for conversation. It's an affront to everything I know about facts and logic. There's no logical way to get from point A to your point D, okay, where you sample suffering and find it uninteresting. Uncompelling. Not worrisome. Not a problem. Go ahead. Give me constant suffering. I'll be fine. Nothing would say that. Nothing sensible, reasonable, logical, nothing would ever say that. I mean, I can't believe you have to have a conversation with people this insane. I mean, it's just, why am I talking to somebody this fucking crazy? Too stupid. Alright, so, till the next, I'm just saying, and so his argument is somehow it's not a material function, when clearly it is. It's a material device that's creating the feeling theater. It's just a fact. That's what brains do. They create it. And that's the part that's so irritating, because Pirro doesn't get the connection. He thinks consciousness or feeling is something you don't need a brain to do. Of course you need a brain to do it. It's a really complex theater being created. And it clearly works in terms of creating value. It does it. It accomplished it. Whether you like it or not, that's what brains do. They generate a value phenomenon of suffering. Alright, anyway, it's just too stupid. Sorry, I don't want to do the philosophy stuff here, so don't comment on it, because I'm not doing it here. Anyway, till the next time and such. Yeah. So.